Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. Yesterday, I don't know if you guys heard, there was an enormous blockbuster NBA trade. Karl-Anthony Towns is going to the New York Knicks. Julius Randle and Donte DiVincenzo are going to the Minnesota Timberwolves, with some other moving parts also going to Charlotte. We will dive deep into everything that this deal means for the NBA landscape. But first, let's hit the music.
They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Way downtown.
Bang! Bang! What is this going to be? Wow! Are you kidding me?
Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. But if you watch the tape, what you will see completely orchestrated this game. Bryce, what's going on, buddy?
Sam, I have an important question. Trivia, you could say. How many hours are there in a week?
24 times 7 is
168. The answer is 168. Yeah. Okay. My week consists of a 4-hour time block where I don't have my phone. And it's the only 4-hour time block in a week of 168 hours where I don't have my phone. I can't have it. I'm coaching a high school football game.
Yeah.
And this trade went down in that 4-hour time block.
I love it. Seriously, when I texted Andrew immediately, I was just like, oh yeah, like, Bryce is definitely at a football game right now, so this isn't happening, immediately. I was literally walking out the door to go to, yesterday was the Australian Football League's grand final. So essentially Super Bowl day here in Melbourne. Literally, you get the Friday beforehand off if you work in normal jobs, like my wife does. Like, it's a whole thing here. So we were literally going out the door to a friend's house right as this thing happened. And I was like scrambling, like, do I podcast? Do I not podcast? Who the hell knows, right? We figured it out at the end of the day. But more importantly, we've got a third person here.
Yes, we do.
Andrew Claudio is going to join us here. Andrew, Knicks expert Andrew Claudio, I think is the best way to describe it. What's going on, buddy?
Pretty eventful 24 hours, if I do say so myself. Aside from speaking of trying to process things, as the Knicks are shaking up our Friday nights or wherever part of the world you are, whatever night it was that it happened. I may also be in the middle of watching a baseball team collapse, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about another team that may or may not have made a good move.
We're here also to remember and remind, more so than remembered, but to remind people, subscribe to the Game Theory YouTube channel, subscribe to the Twitter account. Andrew, handle?
Game Theory Sam V.
Over on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, whatever platform you guys are using, hit the subscribe buttons there. So Andrew's doing a fantastic job running those. Once the season gets going, Andrew and I have talked a little bit about getting me like on there to give some like quick instant live reactions on things. So it won't just be clips from the show. It'll be interactive and there will be a few different things going on there on those feeds. Go subscribe, hit the like button if you're watching us live over on YouTube as well. We're going to start doing this at the start of every show so people actually do it. Okay. Karl-Anthony Towns is now a member of the New York Knicks, or at least will be officially in the coming hours. It seems like there are still some strange moving pieces here that nobody is 100% clear on. I think we're like maybe 95% of the way clear on the full deal. Karl-Anthony Towns is going to the New York Knicks. Julius Randle, Donte DiVincenzo, and it seems like Keita Bates-Diop are going to the Minnesota Timberwolves, along with a protected 2025 Detroit Pistons first-round pick that likely will not transfer this year. Bryce, correct me if I'm wrong, but the protections on this pick are top 13 this year, top 11 next year, and top 9 in 2027. Honestly, correct. I think that on some level, that pick will probably transfer within the next, not this year, but maybe the year after, maybe in 2027. We'll talk about how valuable that pick is momentarily. Charlotte is also involved in this deal to make the money work. Because the Knicks and the Timberwolves are apron teams, they basically have to make the money dollar for dollar equal in this thing. So it seems like the Knicks are going to sign and trade Daquan Jeffries, potentially sign and trade Charlie Brown and Dwayne Washington. Those are names that I've at least seen. But again, we don't have the full structure of this thing. There are a couple of different ways it seems like they could make it work. But Charlotte is basically just getting some pick capital in order to make this thing happen and, facilitate this deal from a financial perspective. Andrew, as the resident, person who cares about this deal, and it is a part of your life more than either of us, when you saw that this happened, what was your immediate reaction?
Ooh, so there's levels to this. I just want to everybody that covers the NBA, thinks about the NBA, watches the NBA, and more importantly, is a fan of an NBA team. You might only get one big trade that you have the chance to react to in your lifetime, or at least over the course of like 5 to 10 years. And you get to process things in the moment of like, oh my gosh, we just made this big trade. My team never makes the big trade.
Right.
Last 9 months, Knicks have made the NBA's big trade 3 different times. So I now had the chance to get practice at this. In fact, this is now the second big trade they've made before playing another game after the last game that the last big trade that they made. And I think the first reaction I had, honestly, it had nothing to do with Julius Randle, had nothing to do with Karl-Anthony Towns. The Villanova identity that was created when they traded for Mikal Bridges and how we were going to go all in on culture and the power of friendship is now gone because Donte DiVincenzo was in the trade. And then you start to process, Julius Randle was extension eligible and is now going to a team. Obviously, the Knicks weren't going to extend him. We had heard some things that they were just far apart in number and that the Knicks, whether or not they were intending on trading him before media day is a different conversation, but that they didn't want this to necessarily linger into the season. And, he ends up going out in the deal, but after the initial shock wore down, you start to think about their needs. And what's the common thing you both have brought up? Well, okay, really more what Bryce has brought up, because Sam, you actually dispelled my concerns about their center depth.
So, yeah, I think I was hoping that Mitch would be ready earlier.
Right.
I think that knowing now that Mitch was not as ready as what we had hoped certainly changed my idea of how urgent the center position was for the Knicks.
So with the Knicks having on Monday announcing that Mitchell Robinson's earliest return date or target return date was going to be December, we're going to potentially lean into small ball. We're going to have to lean into small ball. It wasn't a maybe. It was a definitely. And now you went and got arguably the best stretch 5 ever. I think Wemby's going to make a case for that race being over pretty soon. But the fact that they went and got a center that you don't have to think about death lineups and small ball and whatnot, and you can just think about the offensive ceiling. I've talked myself into the offensive upside of this. I understand losing DiVincenzo hurts, especially after a record-breaking season he had last year. I also, for a while this summer, was like, so where are they finding DiVincenzo's minutes? Like they went out and got Anunoby. They have Mikal Bridges. Tibbs loves Josh Hart. He's Jalen Brunson's best friend, and Julius Randle's coming back. Unless you go small, where's DiVincenzo getting more than 20 to 25 minutes? And not to say he was a luxury, but you understand why he was able to go out in this deal, and they're not feeling a crunch there. So I'll be honest, I'm still processing it a little bit. I still have some concerns, especially on the defensive end, but they've now created a very high ceiling offensively that I'm very intrigued by.
Bryce, what was your immediate takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked. That was my first thing. I think the Villanova Knicks actually, whether it's that would definitely. I was like, really? Donte? After Jalen took the discount and they traded for Mikal, like they're going to trade Donte, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more. I think the first thing I tried to think of was does this move the needle for me with the Knicks? That was the first question I asked myself. I find myself asking or seeing this from the Knicks perspective more than the Wolves. And then I got into the Wolves a little bit more. And my initial reaction, I think my reaction right now is still no. I'm still trying to process that, but I don't know that I feel any better about the Knicks right now than I did Friday at whatever time before this happened. Maybe I'm not seeing something. I'm not saying this is an awful deal, but if I'm going to trade the guys the Knicks traded, I think I would want to feel different about the return.
So, yeah, just my immediate reaction, I'll say, was for Karl-Anthony Towns, because the first tweet that I saw was Karl Towns tweeting like ... like ellipses, right? And then literally in the tweet below it, when I refreshed my feed, it was Shams' Karl-Anthony Towns has been traded, right? So my immediate reaction was, okay, so Karl probably didn't know this was going on at that case. So my immediate take was, oh, wow, like Karl-Anthony Towns has been traded from the only place that he's ever been in his career in Minnesota, a guy that has done an immense amount of community work in Minnesota, a guy that has done a great amount of, rebuilding within that organization, right? This team really struggled to get it going. They had a false start for 1 year with Jimmy Butler where it seemed like things were going great. And then, that collapses under the weight of a practice where Jimmy Butler guarded Karl-Anthony Towns with the third string and kind of, beat their ass according to reports that occurred at the time. One of which was Jimmy Butler doing an interview with Rachel Nichols immediately after the practice. And then he has to rebuild again. And then he gets Anthony Edwards. And now this team is rising and they're becoming a real powerhouse within the Western Conference. And we look at it, and this completely alters the trajectory and landscape of the NBA at this point, because we think the Knicks are fairly real contenders, certainly in the Eastern Conference, as we've talked about throughout the last month on this show. Obviously, we think Minnesota is a real contender in the Western Conference. For this deal to happen on the eve of training camp, I know that we got it last year with the Damian Lillard, Drew Holiday deal, DeAndre Ayton going to Portland, etc. This stuff is rare still, right? It's very weird to see such a shakeup trade on the eve of training camp right before things get going, especially involving two teams that are genuinely contending. It's crazy that this happened, and Karl Towns gets to go, obviously a guy that grew up in New Jersey gets to go, to a team that, if I remember correctly, Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong here, I believe he did grow up rooting for the Knicks.
Grew up
right?
a Knicks fan. He's one of there's
Right.
a nice folder of younger NBA players when they were kids with Knicks paraphernalia on that they're now on the Knicks. Brunson being one of them. Yeah, Cat's one.
It's amazing. So if he was going to go anywhere and probably be on some level disappointed that he's being moved from the only city that he knows, going to New York is probably the best place for that. So the way that I want to, structure this conversation, let's say, I want to talk about the Knicks first. I want to talk about Minnesota after, and then I want to talk about like all the ancillary stuff and the title picture and how this affects that. So let's start with the Knicks. And to do that, I think we have to kind of discuss what Karl-Anthony Towns is at this point. I will ask you guys this. When I immediately saw this deal, I thought it was an overpay by the Knicks. Part of that is contract based, because I did not really think Karl Towns had an immense amount of value league wide on the massive extension that he signed, 4 years, like 240-ish, 230 million or so. Especially given that even though he was an all-star last year, there were moments in the playoffs where Minnesota didn't really close with him. They closed with Naz Reid over him. There has, even though they were successful last year, been a bit of a push-pull between the Rudy Gobert and the Karl Towns portion of the front court. They figured out a way to make it work after a pretty messy first season. I still never really thought that it was ideal, and I've always thought that offensively, Karl-Anthony Towns' best position is the 5. Defensively, though, can you actually have Karl Towns on your roster, playing him at the 5, and expect to have a positive defensive infrastructure? Now, before I pulled a ton of numbers on that last night, I will just ask you guys, maybe we'll start with Andrew as the resident Knicks person here. How do you feel about how big of an upgrade Karl-Anthony Towns is from Julius Randle?
So that I think is the appropriate way to ask this, because there's like internal debate within me and the guys at Knicks Film School. For years, when the Karl-Anthony Towns scuttlebutt would come up, that obviously there's the CAA connection, the Kentucky connection. Like there was very clear interest in the Knicks front office in Towns. And I'd be like, I'm not 1000% sure that it's an upgrade over Julius Randle if he's playing the 4, and you're just going like a 4 for a 4. Like, I like Julius's playmaking. I like surrounding Julius with a bunch of shooters and using him as a hub. It's why anytime I talk to you guys about like the loss of Hartenstein, I was like, well, I think you're going to get that from Julius Randle, who's also just a better offensive player. And now I have to like talk myself into Karl-Anthony Towns being better than Julius. As far as 1-to-1, I think if I had to pick one, I would pick Towns, but I'm not going to sit here and be like, it's definitive. I know what the numbers say. I know what he is efficiently as a shooter. I just also know what Julius's gravity commands as a downhill threat. And, it says something about you when like defenses load up against you. And that's what Julius provides. And the Knicks, built a team that this wasn't a good stats, bad team guy. This was a guy that made the playoffs a ton. And in one playoff series against the Hawks, the entire team decided we're going to load up against him. And he had a bad series. And then in the other 2 playoff series, he went into the series hurt, got hurt again, and then went into the next series playing hurt. So I'm able to have some context with his playoff struggles. And then there's Karl-Anthony Towns, who I know there's been a lot of Knicks propaganda from the Twitter world that look how he shut Jokic down last year, which obviously is nonsense. And I have my hesitations about Cat, specifically defensively, but then showing up in playoff games as well. So that's where I'm at with the 1-to-1, is that I would lean Cat, but I'm not definitive or adamant about it.
Yeah. So I pulled some clips last night. If you're watching on YouTube, which by the way, watch on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel, you'll be able to find, Nikola Jokic and Karl-Anthony Towns being guarded by one another and figuring out, how good Nikola Jokic actually was against Cat and how good Cat was against Jokic. To me, I always thought that Karl-Anthony Towns did a solid job of sending Jokic toward the help and kind of filtering him there and basically executed the scheme. But I didn't think that Karl-Anthony Towns was the biggest part of why Jokic, was slightly less efficient in that series, right? It felt like to me, it was more Rudy Gobert being the help defender coming over was a little bit more valuable, right? That's the first part of this. The second part of this equation for me is the health aspect for Karl-Anthony Towns. Over the last 4 years, Julius Randle has been worth 32.4 wins, according to the Dunks and Threes EPM model, which for me is the best all-in-one kind of metric happening. Karl-Anthony Towns has been worth 32 wins over the course of that time. Big portion of that is that Karl Towns over his last 5 years has only played 250 out of a possible 382 games. Karl-Anthony Towns tore his meniscus last season. He has little things that continue to pop up where he misses time. He played 62 of 82 games last year. He played 29 of 82 games the year before. He played 74 of 82 in 2021-22. And then in, what would that be? 2020, 2021, he was 50 of 72. And then in the COVID year, he played 35 of 64 games, right? This is like not a great injury track record for a team that has a injury-prone starting center in Mitch Robinson. And also for a team that has moved a significant amount of its depth now in order to acquire Karl-Anthony Towns. So that's I think where I'm the most worried about this is from a depth perspective. We kind of love the idea of Tibbs having a number of different bodies and different ways that he could, throw things, right? Throw things at, different teams. This deal to me kind of locks them in a little bit more to playing a specific style, unless you want to try and play Karl and Mitch together, which, as you said, Andrew, I don't think you're particularly enthused about.
Look, there's matchups we could go to it.
Yeah,
but like if you want to go double bigs, fine. You trade for Karl-Anthony Towns to put him back at the 5 to now have a shooter on the floor,
right?
And again, it's the offensive upside as far as I'm concerned.
So, Bryce, what do you think of the lack of flexibility lineup wise that this kind of creates when to me, part of what the Knicks were building was this incredibly fun, switchable, lineup where you could adjust to what different teams are playing. That's the whole benefit to me of having OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges, is being able to slide them up to the 2 and the 3, slide them down to the 3 and the 4, maybe even OG guards 5s occasionally. Like there are just a lot of different kind of things here.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's where I win as well, was like, I hate to go back to Donte again, and we've talked about the depth, and we can't just, get rid of that depth after a single 2-for-1 trade. But I find myself like, your one Deuce isn't maybe as good as we thought he is. Like, I hope Deuce is, but what if Deuce isn't?
Yeah.
Or Shamit is, not able to come in and even
somewhat. And like Landry can't play in the playoffs. Like we know that at this point.
And I really like there's people will throw out Cam Prain, Tyler Kolek, who you love, we love, Sam on this pod, Landry, but it's like Donte was one of the top 5 gravity perimeter guards in the NBA last year. I think is that fair?
Yeah.
Gravity wise. And and then does all the other things as well. So you lose that. And so you just lose some of the depth. I know we don't want to get into the minutia yet, but then you also trade away one of the existing picks you had left. And so now you're down to whatever you have left that you didn't send the Nets, and then you're the Wizards pick. So it's just like, I think you mentioned this, you're kind of starting to get locked into a core, which is okay if it all works. And I think where I'm at after listening to you, Andrew, is I think Cat has to come in and play the 5. Mitch is your backup 5, and you just got to live with he stretches people out, which like will be interesting. Like now you can pull Porzingis away from the rim when you play the Celtics, Embiid away from the rim when you play the Sixers. And then you got to hope OG, Mikal, and Josh are just so good defensively that it doesn't matter. Now, what's scary is teams that can figure out how to just attack Jalen and Cat in ball screens or off ball actions or whatever, and just go at those two and isolate those two guys in action at, over and over and over.
I think that's what's, I mean, we talked about this a little bit last night, the obviously off the air, but like, I do understand the defensive concerns, the ability to put Anunoby and Bridges and Josh Hart or Deuce McBride
or Deuce, Deuce,
right,
Deuce,
whoever you want to put as your 5th starter here. And like, I'll even go this far. I have a lot of hesitations here offensively, but if you wanted to go to Precious Achiuwa there, then he can guard your 5s, and that just slides everybody down 1 as well. then it's the same principle as when he was playing the 4 last year, except now he doesn't have someone in the dunker spot. Now Cat is spacing the floor. But that being said, like, you're gonna have you were gonna have the same problem, I believe, with Randle as well, which is why the thought with the quote unquote death lineup that a lot of Knicks fans had started to speculate about with OG Anunoby and Randle as your 4-5 was that OG guards the 5s on one end of the floor, Randle can guard the 4s, and you just kind of switch if you want to. And, you know, if you wanted to switch 2 through 5 with Brunson hiding on whoever, you could probably get away with that. And then offensively, it's really good. And I think you now just have that same principle where, you know, Cat's guarding a hybrid of 4s and 5s. I'm not saying the Knicks are going to have a great defense. The conversation you guys had, a week or two ago about the best defenses in the NBA. I don't know if the Knicks will have a top 10 defense this upcoming season.
I feel quite confident they won't.
They won't, especially with how. But I just wonder if we're now going the other way. Like, is this now going to be a top 3 or 4 offense with, you know, the potential for it to be more efficient? That team that finished top 4 in offensive rating 2 years ago was like a heavy offensive rebound team, that it wasn't about the first shot. It was, we're getting 3 or 4 attempts at the rim. This now becomes a team that prioritizes making the first shot. Like, and this is weird that the Knicks have just decided the Celtics won, so let's try to be them, the Boston Celtics. So that would be my counter to all that.
Well, here, real quick, both of you, Sam.
Yeah.
Like, is there any worry about like the creation that you lose? Because I feel like with Julius, that was something we anticipated him bringing. Like, maybe the number one thing for me that I thought Julius brings back to this team is, even if it's just in the regular season, it takes some load off of Jalen creating everything. By the way, Julius versus the Hawks series was like, that was my coming out party as a video breakdown.
Yeah.
Like, that was the first one I ever hit. But Cat can pass. You can run the offense through him a little bit, but not in the same way, I don't feel like. So are there concerns there?
Yeah, in the front court, I don't really think that there are. I think that Karl-Anthony Towns and Julius Randle are similar-ish level players in terms of being able to go and create a shot if you need one late in a shot clock, right? They do it in different ways. You know, Julius is going to try and drive and put his shoulder into you and get to like that little, you know, fade away that he takes sometimes, or he's going to try and get all the way to the rim, or he's going to try and throw it off the rim and offensive rebound, right? Like, they do it in different ways. Cat's probably going to try and take you onto the block, or he's going to try and face you up from behind the 3-point line and shoot it, or shoot over the top of you. Like, there are just different ways that they go about playing, right? But I don't think they lose that. I think that they, you know, losing Donte, to answer my earlier question that I asked you guys, right? Is there a massive difference between Cat and Julius Randle? I think there is a difference. I think Karl-Anthony Towns is better than Julius Randle, for sure. I do not think that the difference between Karl-Anthony Towns and Julius Randle is as large as Donte DiVincenzo on what Bryce and I just said was one of the 10 best contracts in the NBA, like 3 weeks ago.
Yep.
And on top of that, you give up a first-round pick, and you have to create all these weird machinations in terms of the salary cap to make it work under the collective bargaining agreement. The reason for that is that Donte became an awesome player and like playmaker and creator off of Jalen Brunson late in the season last year. Andrew, what did Donte DiVincenzo average over his last 35 games of the regular season this year?
In points or threes made?
Points.
Are you asking? I actually don't know, but it's probably close to like 16 or 17 a game.
He averaged 21 points per game.
Wow.
Over his last 35 games of the season this year.
Word? Really?
Donte was really good. Yeah. He shot 43, 39, 78. He took 12 threes a game and made, let's see here, 4.6 of them. Averaged 4.4 rebounds, 3.3 assists with a near 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. Donte became a really good player at the end of last year. And then, oh, by the way,
do the playoffs
into the playoffs, where in the first series, he was just okay, right? Like, he was just fine. But in the second series against Indiana, he averaged 22 in that 7-game series, including the crazy 39-point explosion. We'll talk about Donte a little bit more when we get to Minnesota, but that's what this deal comes down to for me for the Knicks, is that I don't think that the difference between Randle and Cat is Donte DiVincenzo size, let alone this additional first round pick. And on top of that, you can say, oh yeah, Tom Thibodeau, he's going to come and help Karl Towns fix the defense, and he's going to get the most out of him on the defensive end. We've seen this game before.
It was much younger. I don't want to turn into a Tibbs defender here or a Knicks homer here. I do think there's something to be said about like a kid on his rookie deal that is learning how to play under Tom Thibodeau to someone that's now going to be 28 this year, that has seen the league a little bit and might respect what Tibbs brings to the team. And the Knicks are also not to say culture and be like, sound like a Miami Heat fan. Like, he's going into an environment where the entire roster seems to have bought in to what they're building there. And I think he'd be more prepared to succeed under Tibbs than he was the first time.
Sam,
go ahead.
I was just, to Andrew's point earlier, I think I agree with you if they're both fours. Do you think there's a wider gap, say Donte DiVincenzo gap between Cat and Julius Randle at the 5, considering we feel like Julius was going to have to play the 5 for this team? Is that gap wider if you're only talking about them filling the 5 spot for this specific roster and team?
It's wider, but it's still not DiVincenzo sized to me. So I want to note this before I go into all these numbers about defense here with Cat, right? The last time Karl-Anthony Towns played the center position for the Minnesota Timberwolves was the 2021-22 season. That's the year where he played 74 games, right? So out of the last 5 years, the year where he played the most, Minnesota had the 13th best defense in the league. He, I think, had showcased enough improvement defensively to where it was no longer a catastrophe, right? I thought early in his career, he was basically a catastrophe on defense. By 2022, he had figured some things out defensively to where it was no longer like a total mess, right? Having said that, in that 2021-22 season with Cat on the court, they had a 113.4 defensive rating. With him off the court, they had a 110.7 defensive rating. So I would argue that that team was being driven a little bit more by Jaden McDaniels defensively, by Patrick Beverley defensively. That was a year where Jared Vanderbilt really broke out defensively and was really good. It was also the year where they played D'Angelo Russell, I think, kind of across the back line defensively, and he was kind of able to call out coverages and make things a little bit easier. Having said that, Cat was serviceable defensively at the 5, I think is a fair way to put it. When Cat was coached by Tom Thibodeau, that was his second, third, and fourth years in the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota finished 27th, 27th, and 24th in defense.
Is that bad?
That's bad. For Tom Thibodeau teams, that is exceptionally bad. For teams that have Jimmy Butler, one of those teams at least had Jimmy Butler, they finished 27th in defense with Jimmy Butler flying around everywhere, right? In 2016-17 with Karl Towns on the court, they had a 113.6 defensive rating. With him off the court, they had a 107 defensive rating. In 2017-18, the year where they had Jimmy Butler and they kind of tied Jimmy to Cat, when they were on the court together, Towns had a 111.2 defensive rating. When he was on the court, with him off the court, it was 113. So that was a solid year. They still finished 27th in defense. That's not very good, right? With Jimmy and Cat together, they had a +10 net rating. I think you can look at the Jimmy and the Jimmy idea and, kind of pigeonhole this idea of having 2 great defensive wings in OG and McHale, plus the creation in Jalen Brunson, and think that the Knicks can be that good. On offense, I think they're going to be so good that it's not going to matter. The defense, that it still will matter on defense, but the offense is going to be so good that it's going to be ridiculous. In 2018-19, after they had moved Jimmy, They had a 113.7 defensive rating with Towns on the court, 113 with him off the court. In total, during those 3 seasons with Tibbs, 112.8 defensive rating, over 8,500 minutes with Towns on, 3,300 minutes with Towns off, a 111.4 defensive rating. Those numbers courtesy of play-by-play stats. Shout out to Daryl Blackport. The last 2 years combined, obviously they've had Rudy Gobert. I went and pulled the numbers in terms of what they look like when they're on the court together and what Cat looks like when he's on the court without Rudy, because that is ostensibly when he's playing center, right? The team had a 110.4 defensive rating with just Rudy on the court over those 2,900 minutes. With both of them on the court, it was a 111.5 defensive rating. Without Rudy and with Karl-Anthony Towns on the court, it was a 112.8 defensive rating. So that number is okay. It's not catastrophic. That is including 2 seasons. Last year, there was a massive spike in offensive efficiency, right? So, don't look at those numbers combined and say like, oh yeah, they, would have finished the equivalent of 7th defensively or whatever last year, 4th. You can't do that because there was such a massive spike last year that doesn't really work. Last year only, when Rudy was on the court without Karl-Anthony Towns, the Timberwolves had a 105.3 defensive rating. Cat with Rudy was 112.6 defensive rating. Cat without Rudy was 111. 111 is totally okay for last year. Like, that's a good number. You can at least make that work. But obviously there was a massive difference and there was a massive gap in terms of what Minnesota was doing with Karl Towns versus when Rudy was on the court. And that makes me think personally that Rudy and some of the other guys like Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards to an extent, and Mike Conley being able to call out coverages, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker certainly, probably played a much bigger role in lifting that defense than Karl-Anthony Towns. And, Russell Thomas can say a lot of noise in single season, wowie stuff. So with or without you, numbers where you look at the on and offs. I mean, guys, I've just pulled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons worth of numbers here. And he's only been a positive on defense once in those 6 years in terms of his impact on the team. So that's my concern with all of this, is how do the Knicks defend with Karl Towns at the 5? When Tibbs was there, I went and pulled some clips. We can watch them right now. This is the last game that Minnesota played against Houston in their playoff series that year. A couple good, couple bad clips, nothing crazy. You don't have to be watching on YouTube. We'll explain here. Basically, they played Cat in this insanely deep drop. Just this ridiculously, absurdly deep drop where he was below the foul line. And you can't really do that. The reason I like these clips is because A, super high leverage moment, but B, a lot of teams run offense very similar to this Houston team now, right? That's the big key for me. This Houston team is a lot more similar to NBA offense now than what NBA offense was back in 2018, right? And I think that they'll adjust. I don't think Cat will be sitting at the dotted circle necessarily anymore. Having said that, Andrew, you'll be able to tell me this. Mitch doesn't play that much higher.
No, Mitch plays in a low drop. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a low drop
for
Mitch for sure. So I don't think Cat plays well in drop coverage is my main overarching concern here. I think he's a lot better kind of playing at the level and recovering and kind of trying to run around a little bit and just being engaged a little bit more. I don't think he's a very good weak side rim protector. I don't think that he's great at adjusting in drop. Do you think Tom Thibodeau will be flexible enough to do that? Or do you think that he will basically just say, look, this is my scheme and this is what we do here, having already coached Karl-Anthony Towns?
again, the word you used in everything you just said, the one that stood out to me was serviceable. I don't think he's going to elevate their defense. I don't think he's going to, whether they're playing drop, whether they're switching more, whether they're bringing him to the level, whether they're putting him at the, like, wherever he's at the nail, like, regardless of where you put him, I think teams will try to attack it. They're also going to bring Jalen Brunson into a lot of actions, especially since the Knicks don't play any zone. Like, they're going to take advantage of a lot of pick and roll with both of them. I agree with you. The defense is a concern. My hope is that even when they do have Towns and drop at times, or if you just take advantage of switching, that the defensive personnel around them is better than, now again, you said Jimmy Butler on that team, but like the defensive personnel around them now is some of the most high level defensive personnel that you can put around him. Like you talk about Gobert, like one of a generationally great defensive player, which, like, where were the Wolves as a team defensively? Now, I don't think the Knicks can get to that level defensively.
Yeah.
But if they can get to that 13-14 range and have the best offense in the league potentially, then that's where I think the sweet spot is.
So here, Bryce, I'm going to ask you this question now. What I'm worried about specifically with the Knicks is the Brunson Cat pick and roll, basically. I'm sure that the Knicks and Tibbs will try to hide Brunson in some way. But when you have OG and McHale and, probably Josh Hart and Deuce and those guys, right? You're probably going to switch 1 through 4, I would guess, on a lot of off-ball actions, right? You're not going to have Jalen like fight through all these off-ball actions, right, in the playoffs. How do you go about guarding a Towns Brunson ball screen situation? Do you try to just like sag way off and help? Do you that's where I'm worried about this, is that specific duo concerns me.
Can that duo get aggressive and then you rely on those 3 behind them to just be really good? Like that.
Maybe
my first instinct is, you talked about Cat playing higher. I don't know how much the Knicks do this, Andrew, but like my almost instinct is like, let Cat play higher. Let's blitz it and let those 3 guys behind it go crazy and just be really good in scramble and rotations.
So this is where I need both of your help, because I'm coming at it from the perspective of what they did with Randle. When they had Randle, there were times when they would blitz it. There would be times where he'd just play the same drop. Randle, watching him defensively at times can be a chore, because there are high energy plays where he's engaged.
Yeah.
And then there are him with his hands down, and this is a very, like, there's this game against the Suns last year that stood out to pretty much every Knicks fan, because it was a bit of a turning point. Randle was being taken advantage of in moments throughout the first 10 or 15 games of the season. And on this Sunday night game against the Suns, they made it a mission, like, oh, just bring him into every action. We're not even attacking Jalen Brunson tonight. We're going Devin Booker in every pick and roll, and we're taking advantage of Julius Randle. And it was the first time they actually got exposed because of Randle on the defensive end, whether it be in drop or, whatever coverage they were in, they were taking advantage of him. So I have to now recalibrate and ask you guys, like, where they could put Towns, because I do think Tibbs will adjust to what's best for his personnel. And if he thinks it's Towns in a deep drop, great. If they bring him up higher, great. If it's switching everything, great. I think he'll adjust. But what do you guys think would be the best coverage for him?
Yeah. So the difference between Randle and Towns is that Randle is smaller, but a little bit more mobile, right? Than what Cat is.
Okay.
He just, like, truly he is. Like, we can talk about
when
Randle's
engaged,
mobility
yes.
concerns and the engagement, but look, like, during a regular season, there are going to be moments where you get a little bit of that from Cat too, for sure. I think he is generally a bit more engaged than Randle, but I wouldn't say it's like significantly, a different deal. I would say that given that playing like a higher catch drop almost would be my plan. Like kind of how, I mean, look, I'm going to bring up Anthony Davis, but obviously Cat is nowhere near as good as Anthony Davis. I'm just saying scheme wise, the Lakers do like to play like a bit of a higher drop with AD. And then I would have, as Bryce alluded to, Mikal and OG kind of hopefully being able to like run back behind the play a little bit and be able to clean up while Cat recovers back into the play as a drop defender back onto his big man. Bryce, is that kind of what you're envisioning a little bit? You're unmuted, Bryce.
I'm sorry, I was typing stuff. I think in the playoffs, that's what a game, because here's what I wouldn't want. Here's my biggest fear is you just let a team get into that 2-man combination and attack it. And they get to a mid-range jumper. And then Cat plays a little bit higher and then Hezzy and goes by. And then he overcommits and the big picks and pops. Let's say it's the Celtics or whatever, whoever it is. And so I would just want to do something where it's, you know what? We're going to get the ball out of this dude's hands and out of Jalen and Cat's primary defenders as quick as possible. And we have these other dudes that are awesome. And so let's make them be the best defenders on the floor. I just don't know how realistic that is in the regular season. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you can do that possession after possession after possession in a random game in February. Now, if there's a coach to do it, it's probably Tom Thibodeau.
Yeah. And to your point about the playoffs being potentially doing something different, this is where I will say the most engaged I saw Julius in the last 2 years. And as far as like him not being as much of a liability was that Cavs playoff series with the Knicks 1-5, and they were blitzing like over half court. They were, if they would go to the guard screens in Cleveland and go Garland, Mitchell, and Randle's jumping it. And it's like, oh, we're doing this now. Okay. So there is a version of that where they switch up their coverages when it becomes more important, like during the Sixers series with Maxey. Now, nothing worked against Tyrese Maxey. So there was no actual coverage that you can point to and say that the Knicks like succeeded, but they did switch it up to first. It's like, all right, we're going to put OG Anunoby on him and he'll chase him around. Then here's Deuce McBride. He'll chase him around. Then we put Josh Hart on him. And then it just became blitzing him. And if Embiid puts up 40, he puts up 40, but we need to make sure Maxey doesn't get going.
So to close on the Knicks here a little bit, right? I want to move to the Wolves after this because we've, as I said, we wanted to structure this, the Knicks stuff up top because I think the Knicks stuff is super interesting. And then we're going to move to the Wolves after. Part of that is because we want to clip up these videos and things like that for YouTube, to be honest with you. My biggest overarching concern for the Knicks, to be completely transparent, is not what it does for this year. It's what if this does not work this year? And then you have to figure out what happens because the Celtics are still better than they are, right? Just point blank. I think this trade actually makes them a little bit more likely to be able to manage the Celtics and be able to deal with the Celtics. I think this makes them a more, if they're at full health, a more interesting matchup for the Celtics now because they can theoretically just go, okay, we're going to go and try and like outscore you and see what happens, right? We have the wings to be able to guard Jalen and Jason and OG and Mikal. We have Jalen Brunson, who we think is going to be the elite level guard we need. And we're going to just see what happens with Cat against Kristaps and everything like that. I think this makes them match up better with Boston. I actually think it kind of makes them match up worse with Philly, if I'm being honest. Because I think that what they'll probably try to do is have Cat guard Joel, and that tends not to go super well in the experience that I have, I feel like.
Who do you think they're going to put on Joel? Because my initial thought was this also, that Philly's the team that worries me a little bit more.
I would think they'll have Anunoby.
Yeah, so that's my point. I think they will have Cat guard Joel and then maybe have Mitch on the court as like a help defender. That's a series, or you try and have Cat guard Joel or OG guard Joel. And I don't think either of those things are, if Joel gets to the playoffs healthy, I don't think either of those things work well.
Did you say OG on Joel, Andrew?
I did, but I said you could have Mitch or Anunoby.
Okay. I guess my thing with that is like the OG one makes sense if Cat was a better off ball. Like I would like to see him in that role and see how good he could be as like the roamer that then comes over and helps OG and doesn't get lost guarding Caleb Martin or Oubre or Paul George, whoever he's having to guard now.
Yeah, I assume they would have Mitch do that. Like,
so
Mitch
they would
guard
this is
Martin
where they would go
help
big
defender.
then.
That's where the two. So sorry, go ahead, Sam.
Then you have to deal with Maxey. That's my main concern for that is, okay, we're just going to run Maxey Joel ball screens all the time. And we're going to make Cat garden ball screens. And that's going to be it.
So that
he's not going to be successful against Tyrese. Tyrese is too fast for him.
So what if you if you don't have Cat specifically as the primary defender on Joel, and it's either Anunoby or Mitch, like it's the exact same coverage that they were playing in the playoffs last year.
And you just run. So say he's guarding Caleb Martin, right? You run 1-4 ball screens with Tyrese and Caleb Martin, and bring Cat up to the level.
So then you're just saying bringing Cat into every. I think you're gonna have this problem with Randle anyway, which is why I think if any concerns I had with Philly were that like it's either Randle, like it's the exact same thing, and I think the Knicks have, at least from a 1-to-1 standpoint, enough,
So yes, I don't disagree with you on that, but here's the issue I was getting at. Let's say this doesn't work, right? They're kind of locked into this roster now.
Yeah, this is the team now. Yeah.
This is the team. They are, we all assume they're going to extend Mikal, right? Like that's kind of where this is going.
Eligible Monday.
They're going to be locked in at like a little over $200 million in 2026-27 for like 7 or 8 guys. The first apron threshold is currently slated at 215. Second apron is currently slated at 228. And those 7 or 8 guys do not include Mitchell Robinson's deal or like any other center or big or whatever, right? So they are financially pretty strapped to this at this point. And part of what I liked about the way the Knicks were building this is that because Jalen chose to give some back, and seemingly because Mikal is probably going to take this extension, potentially going to take this extension until it happens, right? I liked the idea of them continuing to be flexible in the marketplace. I just don't think at the end of the day, this is the move I would have made.
They're at, by the way, they're at 200 for 5 guys. Cat, OG, Brunson, Bridges, Hart, and that's if you put Bridges at 40 million in 26-27 for 5 guys.
I think it's a little bit less. I think he'll make a little bit less than 40, but nonetheless, your point is valid, Bryce. So I think that this would not have been my all-in move, I guess is where I'm at on it.
I don't even disagree with you, Sam. I think the initial reaction to the eventual trading of Julius Randle, because we'd always said he would be our DeMar DeRozan one day, that one day this guy that helped build the thing would get traded for the superstar that helps you get over the threshold. And I don't have that definitive confidence in trading Randle like you could have had as a Raptors fan, that you traded out DeMar but got Kawhi Leonard back. I'm clearly less concerned about the defensive issues. I wish I loved Cat more. I just was never a Cat guy.
That's kind of where I'm at.
Make it so much more confident about this deal and the offensive ceiling being the thing that matters. If I just was always a Cat guy, I never was. So I'm more talking myself into it than
Sam. How would you feel if they would have traded, if it was only the pick?
Randle and the pick for Cat.
Yeah,
I think that it'd make all the sense in the world.
Yeah, you would feel really good now. Like Donte,
Yeah.
Donte being the difference between the two guys is the hang up here.
To me, Donte is worth like multiple first round picks. on that
Especially
contract.
considering Cat's contract
Yes.
and how
I
it
think they
locks you
basically
in.
moved 3 firsts, if we're doing it in draft capital terms. I think they basically moved like 3 firsts and then whatever picks they moved to Charlotte to facilitate this thing for Cat on a deal where I think it's frankly like a negative value contract at the end of the day.
So can I just one DiVincenzo note, and then we can go over to the Wolves, because I know we've gone a little long here.
Yeah.
Because the sample you brought up is the first, it's the last 35 games of the season, which coincide with Randle dislocating his shoulder and
Yes.
OG Anunoby only playing, I believe, the final seven games are left in the regular season because he went out with his elbow injury. So his volume went up significantly, which is like, I understand what it was.
Took 17 field goal attempts per game in that time.
And how many of those were threes? Because that's what he became.
12.
It was just he was Klay Thompson for 35 games. Is there a world where the Knicks sold high? I understand how valuable the contract is, but that's my thought is, did they actually sell high on a guy that had a really good 35 games?
It's
unequivocally,
good call.
Yes. I think there's absolutely a chance of that. And that's why, like, when I talk about this deal, I can say that this isn't the deal that I would have done. I think there's a chance this deal looks totally fine for the Knicks.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't say that this is like they are, fucked and they have no chance to make a title run. They do, I think. Yeah. Like I said, this makes them match up better, in my opinion, with Boston than they previously did. So I'm all for that. I just also think that there is significant downside risk here in a way that I would not have continued to explore if I was them.
To your point, if it doesn't work, they're fucked. Whereas if the lineup they had this year with Randle didn't work, you have one more move in you. Yeah, you have an option to go to.
You still have options. Correct. Okay, let's go to Minnesota. I've seen a lot of Minnesota fans dislike this deal. I think that part of that is probably that Karl-Anthony Towns, there's a real connection there. As I opened with, there's a real connection in the community with Karl-Anthony Towns. I love this deal for Minnesota. I'm just going to say it straight up. I think this deal makes them more likely to win the title than what they were previously with Karl-Anthony Towns. And we can talk about the concerns that we have with Julius Randle. We can talk about the concerns we have in terms of fit with Randle and Anthony Edwards. I think that adding a first round pick, which gives them trade flexibility, and I think that adding Donte significantly upgrades their rotation and their depth in a way that you and I, Bryce, have talked about pretty substantially being concerned about, especially in the backcourt, because you and I don't think Rob Dillingham is going to be able to play from day one.
And definitely not in the playoffs.
Definitely not in the playoffs. They now have a top 8 of Mike Conley, Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Julius Randle, Rudy Gobert, and then Donte DiVincenzo, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Naz Reid. I think there's a chance that they now have a top 3 bench unit in the NBA because of those 3 players alone.
I was going to say, like, those 3, how many benches have a more talented first 3? There may be teams with more depth, but is there more talented first 3 guys off the bench than those 3 guys? That's a pretty good trio.
I think those 3 guys might be 3 of the best 10 bench players in the league. Donte is a stud. Naz Reid is obviously a stud who just finished second in 6th Man of the Year award voting or whatever. And then they also have Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who is
one
probably
6th Man of the Year award. One.
Nas won it. Sorry, I couldn't remember. Yeah. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is probably the most underappreciated defensive guard in the NBA. Nickeil is a stud on defense. He isn't just good. He is a great defender. So to me, given that I just said, I don't think there is a massive difference if you're putting Randle at the 4 or Cat at the 4. I think this is a massive upgrade for Minnesota, and they get the first round pick to be able to have flexibility moving forward.
I'm not as excited. Is Julius Randle a long-term? Because like I can't help but think this was a financial decision where Randle plays till the trade deadline and then gets moved.
It could be. So let's talk about that. The Randle piece of this is interesting. I talked to Jason Timp yesterday. Jason will be on the show later this week. We're doing a home and home for people to get excited about. From what I know, Jason is not excited about the Randle and Anthony Edwards fit because Randle likes to drive and take up space in that mid-range area. And Ant obviously really likes to drive and get all the way to the rim and be physical and powerful, right? I think that people just look at, and this is where Andrew comes in and will be able to correct me if I'm wrong. From a spacing perspective, when it comes to Julius Randle, I think people just look at the 3-point percentage. He had the one outlier 40% year or whatever, where he's made 31, 34, 31 in 3 of the last 4 years, and think teams kind of leave him open on the perimeter. They don't. You actually can't leave him open on the perimeter because if you do, you risk him driving and getting ahead of steam. And if he gets ahead of steam, it's over. Like he's getting to the rim and scoring. You actually have to like be in contact range with him to be able to like stop him and like hold him up before he gets into that like mid-post mid-range area, because if he gets there, he's going to get a fairly efficient shot for him. So I don't think Randle's spacing and the concern of Randle's spacing is quite as worrisome as what others do. And Andrew, maybe you'll be able to answer this, having watched Julius Randle play on a team next to Mitchell Robinson for so long, because, you know, it's not dissimilar in terms of the role that Rudy will have. Rudy's a better screener and dribble handoff guy and everything, but nonetheless, Andrew, your thoughts on Randle and his offensive ability?
I think you just hit it. The fact that he's played with a true traditional center, I want to say 100% of the minutes that he was a New York Knick, whether it be next to Taj Gibson or next to Mitchell Robinson or Nerlens Noel or Isaiah Hartenstein. There's like maybe 100 minutes with Obi Toppin where Tibbs saw it, threw up, and then never showed it to us again. But the fact that he's used to playing with a rim running traditional dunker spot center and was still able to be the battering ram, like downhill bully ball, Julius Randle commands the gravity that you're talking about. And I forget whether it was B-Ball Index or one of the chart sites puts up the gravity rankings, and it's like 97th percentile in gravity, despite not really being a threat from 3-point range. Now, 2 years ago, when the Knicks were the 5 seed, the first Jalen Brunson season, he wasn't super efficient from 3, but the volume was really high, and it made him more of a threat as far as gravity was concerned. And then last year, especially once they traded for Anunoby, and you just had more spacing around Randle, he became so much more of a threat in the passing as well as just downhill. So that's where I actually agree with you, Sam. Like him as a 4 fits really well.
Yeah.
I have some questions about when you go McDaniels, Randle, and Gobert in the spacing there, and how it can benefit Ant in the long term. But as far as Randle's concerned, he commands gravity, commands attention. That's for sure.
Yeah. The big thing is, can McDaniels like consistently knock down open threes, right? If he can knock down open threes, I think it's fine. The other piece of this, we talked about Tibbs with Karl-Anthony Towns before. Chris Finch has coached Julius Randle before. Do you know what Julius Randle's breakout season was? It was in New Orleans under Chris Finch. Now, he wasn't the head coach, obviously, but he ran the offense. And for years now, from New Orleans to Denver to now in Minnesota, Chris Finch has been one of the clearly most creative offensive minds in how he works through spacing from his big men. Did it with Jokic. He did it with, Anthony Davis, did it with Julius Randle. He's done it this time around in Minnesota with Karl Towns and Rudy Gobert. Chris Finch is one of the best offensive minds. Like, I'm not worried about the spacing with Randle. I'm worried about the defense and like consistently bringing a high level of defensive energy and intensity. But do you know what the best way to insulate Julius Randle is? Having the best rim protector in the NBA behind him in Rudy Gobert.
Yeah.
On top of that, Julius Randle is in a contract year, basically. He has a player option for $30 million for next year. And he's felt disrespected, I'm sure, from all of this. I think there's a chance Julius Randle is going to come and just be fucking furious and be like, I am going to have my best season of my career this year. And he's like, I don't want to sit here and say like, it's not hard to build a team around Julius Randle. It is. It's really hard to build a team that totally works around Randle because he takes up a lot of usage. He doesn't really defend at a super high level. Although if you look through his last few years, been, slightly negative to neutral on defense. If you look at a lot of the metrics, right? Part of that I think is infrastructure from Tibbs. Part of that is everything else. He has the Rudy infrastructure now. I think it'll probably be fine. Randle is a guy that's made 3 out of the last 4 All-Star games. He's a multi-time All-NBA player. Bryce, I'll ask you this. Can you remember a player that is coming off of 3 All-Star games in 4 years, 2 All-NBA berths in the last 4 years that gets more disrespected than Julius Randle?
No, it makes me feel like an idiot. Like, it makes me feel like I don't know ball because I like Julius Randle. And I always think it's a bias of the story I told earlier about how he, that series against the Hawks was one of the first videos I ever did and got people were like, oh, this is pretty good, and kind of got me going. So I was like, oh, maybe I just have a soft place in my heart for Julius Randle. I think I went on your show, Andrew. I think we were supposed to talk about the Pistons, maybe the trade or something. I was like, I just want to talk about Julius Randle because I think Julius Randle is good at basketball. And so my question then goes back to what I asked earlier. He does take a lot of usage. Who's the guy on the Timberwolves that needs usage other than Anthony Edwards now? And I love Mike Conley, but he's mostly like, hey, kind of spot up, knock down threes, be a vet, get the offense. Like, don't you think that could be used? Like, we talked about that second unit, Sam, right? We love Donte and Nas, but I think putting Julius with them and letting him be the hub of that actually ends up working really well for that team, does it not? Isn't that something they could use?
And real quick, Andrew, to Bryce's point, the thing that Chris Finch, I think, has kind of weaponized almost better than any big coach in the league is he just has bigs like grab and go and start the break. Sure. Right. You'll be able to explain. Julius is fantastic at that. Like he can absolutely grab and go and just create transition opportunities. Like I had one, NBA person I talked to yesterday bring up, okay, like this would be amazing to just have Naz Reid and Julius Randle, kind of running the second unit basically. And surround them with spacers like, Donte DiVincenzo and, have Nickeil Alexander-Walker out there for defense, right? Look, like defensively, they're going to get annihilated on the interior because Naz is also not a great defender. But I think that for a second unit playing against bench players in the NBA, they're going to go like that bench unit would outscore teams pretty easily and substantially.
And I think that's what's the tough part for me to process in all of this is Randle never played against bench units. He was always, Tibbs had the tendency from time to time to go hockey shifts where, like 5 on, 5 off. And it was midway through the 22-23 season that he pivoted to a 9-man rotation. And the guy that played with the second unit was RJ Barrett. After they traded out RJ is when we saw Randle play with the second unit with Anunoby. And you started to see him take advantage of second units a little bit. It was mixed results on how effective it was, but that's something we all thought of, that you just have 2 on at any point of Randle and Anunoby and Bridges and Jalen Brunson, and you should be fine throughout a game. And to your point about him getting out in transition is absolutely something to be excited about. Him on the defensive boards is a really effective tool. The question I would have is him to the usage conversation that you brought up, the usage point you brought up. He's a bit of a ball stopper, and at times can be a slow processor. And he has been open about how when he had his ankle injury, it's the first time he really dove into film study. And it's when he noticed all the double teams that we were yelling at him about. Like, hey, they're coming on the weak side. They're coming on the strong side. You should probably get rid of this ball very quickly. And it's why I'm curious now on a team where there's going to be less spacing around him, or less shooting around him. There's not going to be as many options. How you guys think he'll do where the quicker decisions are probably even more necessary, and he's never really been much of a quick decision maker in the half court.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that, like, I don't think Cat is either.
At
the end of the day.
That's why the playmaking part of it is a gigantic concern for me with Cat. I look at him more of a floor spacer than a decision maker.
Like, honestly, like, people look at the assist numbers and will say, like, oh, they're fairly similar as passers. I think Randle's a better passer.
Much better. My hot take for this year was going to be Randle's averaging 7 assists a game. Yeah.
Like, I think that's plausible for sure. When I look at the two of them, I'm just like pulling up like team assist percentages, right? Just with the Wolves, just out of curiosity to see where they fell. These are the playoffs. They were kind of down near, I think, the bottom in the playoffs. Let's see where they were league wide. They were like league average, league wide in terms of team assist percentage. But like Mike Conley moves the ball pretty quickly, and I think Rudy like doesn't hang on to the ball, right? So I don't disagree with your point. I think that it is by far the biggest concern is how Randle kind of fits within this offense in terms of the spaces he likes to occupy. Again, like, people will bring up, he likes to play in the mid post when, the Anthony Edwards likes to drive and get to the basket. Well, they made it work with Jalen Brunson. Jalen Brunson loves to drive and get into that, 6 to 8 foot range at the end of the day. That's kind of where he's trying to live. So I think that'll be okay. I think that Finch will make that work. It is, to me, like a passing and ball stopping and playmaking question more than that. And that is where I think things could get like a little bit funky.
Yep.
Bryce, do you have we haven't really like kind of talked about the Minnesota fit in terms of Donte yet. What are your thoughts on how Donte works with this team?
I mean, I think that's what's nice about Donte is I think you can about drop him into any team. I think that's why we talk about, him being the value contract he is. I think that's also important to Minnesota. I don't know. I worry about where they're going to go with this in terms of the finances, but Donte being on such a good contract makes things a little bit easier for him. But just having a floor spacer like Donte, we talked about it earlier, like he can take up a bunch of usage and take a bunch of shots if he really needs to. I watched some of those games. I remember just putting in my notes like, oh my gosh, like he's just pulling with ultimate confidence. So I think it's a really good pickup for Minnesota. I don't know when we'll get into the draft pick. I think that's probably a little more valuable than what people may realize, because that Pistons pick is starting to get where it may actually convey. So I think Minnesota did well. Even if we get past the Julius Randle conversation, the two other assets in this deal, I think are pretty valuable.
Donte, to me, is such a perfect fit with that backcourt. It's a perfect fit next to Anthony Edwards, because Anthony Edwards is going to be the guy who dominates the ball anyway. So having just a gunner with full license to fire from three like Donte is, and then who can attack closeouts, who you can't like be completely cognizant of and just close out exceptionally heavy on, because he will drive and get to that mid-range area, drive and get to the 6 to 8 foot range more than all the way to the rim. Donte doesn't love to drive all the way and finish at the rim, but having that guy next to Anthony Edwards is an incredible idea. Also, having him next to Mike Conley totally works, because he can guard twos as well. having another gunner next to Mike Conley who can play in ball screens with Rudy Gobert at a super high level. We've seen that offense for, God, feels like 7 or 8 years now between Utah and Minnesota. I just think that they have a lot of different ways that they can attack you. And I think Donte, in his floor spacing ability and his ability to occasionally run the point and his ability to play both on and off the ball, really lifts that trio of backcourt players at a high level. And I honestly wonder if you could find a world where Anthony Edwards is guarding threes and then you end up with all three of these guys on the court at the same time. I would imagine it won't be the primary idea of what they're doing, but I think from a lineup versatility and flexibility perspective, it's difficult for me to imagine a more perfect fit, especially when you throw in Nickeil Alexander-Walker into the mix here as like a primary elite defender and just letting Donte just go and knock down shots.
Andrew, you watched it all last year.
So I gotta be honest, he took him down. So I was just mesmerized by watching Donte DiVincenzo highlights on the YouTube channel, and I'm like, I'm never gonna see this again. You literally just showed clips from his last ever game as a New York Knick and him, and what he became over the last third of the season. Look, whether he's that Klay Thompson sample is replicable or not, I think will play out. I agree that he is going to be an important part of the second unit there. I also agree, Bryce, to your point, like there's no like, oh, Donte doesn't fit here in any lineup that you want to go to. He's going to be, if you want to play him at the 3, you can. If you want to go to like a 3-guard lineup, if you want to make him, see, I never really saw him as a 1. Like they never had him do primary ball handling responsibilities. I will say there were some really shorthanded games that the Knicks played last year where just by necessity he was the primary ball handler because they had nobody else who could dribble on the court. But so I don't know about him next to Ant as like the 1-2, and if you wanted to maybe make Ant the primary ball handler, you could. But I'm sure Finch might experiment with it. He, even if he isn't like that guy that from the last 35 games, there's like the 35 games before that won him the starting job. He took over the starting lineup role from Quentin Grimes last year, who was like a Tibbs darling. Tibbs on draft night was like, you need to go get me Quentin Grimes. And they went and got him. Quentin Grimes took Evan Fournier's spot in the rotation, and we never saw Evan Fournier again. And less than a year later, DiVincenzo takes Grimes' spot, which is how effective he was.
I saw Evan Fournier again.
Well, we know why.
I had to watch Evan Fournier.
Yes, we both got a good look at the Evan Fournier. Best wishes overseas, Evan, but we know why you got taken out of the starting 5.
Your point on Donte selling high was a really good one. It was one that I hadn't considered. I still don't love that for the Knicks necessarily, but the idea of what we all remember him of right now and selling high on that is a really good
well point. Here's the thing though, to Andrew's point, he can be 15 to 20% worse than he was over the last 35 to 50 games of the year, including the playoffs, and he's still a plus asset on this contract based on what we've seen. Like he's still a really, really useful, valuable player for them to have. And to be able to throw out Donte and Nickeil Alexander-Walker off the bench, being able to throw out, this is the question I wanted to ask you guys. I kind of think Donte closes for this team. They'll probably start Mike, and then they'll use Donte as a closer because Donte can really defend. And Mike is a little bit smaller, and you can attack him occasionally in ball screens. I think Donte probably makes a little bit more sense in those circumstances. Thoughts?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. And I know some people may question like Ant's decision making and think that he needs Mike out there. And that may be true. But if Ant's going to be your dude, if you're going to win a championship with him as your guy, then he's got to be able to handle those situations without the vet point guard next to him. So I don't mind that, as Mike has, obviously aged and, still playing at a pretty good level for his age. But yeah, I don't mind the idea of that.
I think there's a chance it could be their best lineup. If you think that Ant could run the offense without another primary ball handler, then I think it's the lineup I thought of when they especially with my concerns with their spacing with McDaniels, Randle, and Gobert on the court at the same time.
Yeah, like you end up replacing the cat floor spacing with Donte.
Yeah.
And it's different when it's not coming from the 4-5.
Yeah.
And instead it's coming from the 1-2. But it's a big help, especially you don't have to close with Julius. You can close with Naz Reid. You have so many different options that you can throw out there, I think, to make lineups with Anthony Edwards work. Because ultimately your goal here is to make Anthony Edwards the best version of Anthony Edwards that he can be. Right.
Can I ask a question? Because you hinted that you don't have to close with Julius Randle. In the 5 years that I watched Julius Randle play for the Knicks, I actually know the answer to this. There was one game that he didn't close in a game he was healthy for. And it was a playoff game that he was hurt. His ankle was hurt. And the lineup that was out there was Obi Toppin at the 4 with Mitchell Robinson. It was game 4 against the Cavs. And he was so bad. And like his only job was to be a decoy while Evan Mobley was taken out of actions. And Evan Mobley got his 5th foul. And Tibbs recognized, well, if Evan Mobley's not on the court, I'm going to go with just a healthier player. And the Cavs just never brought Mobley back in with enough time for it to matter. That's the only time that I ever saw Julius not close a game. So this then goes to I'm not going to say, I don't want to put this on Julius because I trust he's a professional, and if it's best for the team, he'll do it. But in a walk year, may become a thing. Oh, I came here on a contract year and I'm not closing. Like, I wonder if that's something, the politics of it become a problem.
Look, I think he will close most games, to be clear. But I think there are times where Naz Reid will probably close. Like, Naz is awesome.
Oh,
like,
Sam, I agree with you. That might be the right move. I'm
like
just saying
Karl-Anthony
never saw it with the Knicks. So now to hear that he might not close is a new thing, both for me and for the Julius Randle experience.
Yeah, like there were games where Karl-Anthony Towns would lose closing minutes to Naz, right? In the Denver series, that happened at least once I can think of off the top of my head. I believe twice, but I can think of one off the top of my head. So I really think it just creates so many more options for Minnesota at the end of the day. And that's just this year. The level to which this deal unlocks a lot of Minnesota's future now is drastic. And I would bet that that's why Tim Connolly wanted to do this more than anything else. Minnesota has always, with this, Rudy Gobert deal where he has, I think, $46 million on a player option next year, and Karl-Anthony Towns where he was making, I think it's like 57, 54, something like that next year. And then by next year, I don't mean 2024, 25. I mean 2025, 26. They were going to be drastically into the second apron in the middle of going through an ownership changeover, where I think nobody is probably pleased about being a second apron team in the middle of a ownership changeover, because it creates a lot of issues. So if you can basically stay the same while potentially avoiding the second apron and avoiding like real money, which they should be able to, I would say. Rudy's deal is 46.6 for the 2025-26 season. Bryce and I, we've always kind of said that the Rudy deal that makes the most sense is doing something like 35 a year for 3 years and kind of reducing that number in 2025-26, but then giving him more when maybe he might not be worth it. When he's 36-ish, I think would be the year that he would be in the last year of that deal. Because I think he's 32 now. Yep. So you can find a way to smooth out the Rudy number. And then on top of it, I mean, you and I mean, maybe Andrew, you can answer this differently. I mean, you don't think Randle is getting a deal near what Cat signed, right? Like we're not talking about $50 million a year for Julius Randle. I think we're talking about probably like 35 a year for Julius Randle.
So that's
if it goes well.
That's what I'm curious, because we had a couple of, like, we had Bobby Marks on this offseason, especially nearing the Randle extension date. And he was saying a number. He was like, if Aaron Mintz, the Julius's agent,
Yeah.
gets the call for 3 for $100 from the Knicks, you take it. And is Julius taking that? Is why I'm curious if that's why. I wonder if that's why the Knicks eventually decided we need to trade this guy, because he's not going to take that type of market number. And he made,
Well,
I don't know if he'll
guess
test
for the
free
Knicks-
agency, but if he wants the bigger number,
For the Knicks, I don't even know if you could offer that.
3 for
I
$100
think.
on an extension.
Yeah, because you would need to know how this whole thing is going to work before you do that. Like, to me, you
I see
can't
what you're
offer
saying,
that
yeah.
right now. Maybe you can offer that, middle of the season or something like that later, next off season, you can try and sign him to that deal. But I don't know if you could lock yourself in at that number with Randle, given the concerns that you might have about how Randle was going to fit with all these new pieces. And I'm not saying that they should lock in Randle now in Minnesota either. I probably wouldn't do that if I was them. But if he plays well and this works, I think we're probably talking 33 to 35 top end if it goes fantastic and he averages like 25, 10, and 5 or something crazy, right? I still think we're talking like $40 million a year probably if it goes incredibly well. $40 million a year for him plus what Donte is getting is still less than what Cat is at by like $6 million. And that's at the top end of Julius's market if you keep him. I think there's a chance that, like, if it doesn't go crazy well, he might opt in at $30 million a year. And then you have an expiring deal for Julius Randle that you can potentially attach this pick to at the deadline, and you can attach something else and say, okay, this is what we've got, right? Give us what we need, give us X wing, give us whatever you want, right? Like maybe Atlanta would do something like Julius Randle and a first for DeAndre Hunter and, Bogdan Bogdanovic, or I'm like literally just throwing out names, right? I have not thought about value. I haven't thought about anything, right? I'm just trying to come up with ideas of how they could go about thinking about their future, right? I think that this gives them way more flexibility. It gives them way more potential to say, like, re-sign Naz Reid long-term and be able to keep him at like $20 million a year, $25 million a year, whatever it's going to be. Probably 25, I would guess. Could be more than that in theory. I maybe it depends on how great of a season he has. And it might be a fantastic season. Essentially, it just gives them way more flexibility. It gives them way more outs as they build around Anthony Edwards long-term. And that's what I would have wanted if I was Tim Connolly. I would just want to extend this window out with Anthony Edwards as long as I could, especially if I think I might not even be downgrading by moving Towns. I might be upgrading. I might be, doing whatever.
Yeah, I think that's where I landed with the Wolves, was maybe not as excited as you on this season, but definitely understand the flexibility moving forward as you're all of a sudden really near the end of the Gobert deal. You just outlined Julius Randle, Naz as a player option for that. Like you can get really low on the books if you really wanted to. You have Donte on a great contract. And then for a team that has like no first round picks because of everything they sent for Gobert and everything they traded for Rob Dillingham, you at least have a single first round pick theoretically, to go acquire somebody if you need to. I almost looked at it as like, are they looking to clear things up a little bit, maybe get a little younger and move into a new iteration with Anthony Edwards? Obviously they are. I'm just kind of interested now if it's with Julius Randle, if it's with Donte, or if it's actually moving on from a lot of these pieces and going way younger and way different. And I'll be interested to see how they thread that needle.
Do you know what like the absolute like batshit crazy thing is? Let's say that Rudy does not re-sign. Let's say that Randall leaves. Let's say
they could have cap space, leaves. Right? They could have
max cap space.
I was gonna say, like, I was looking at it's all player options, but like if they somehow got him not to, I mean, Naz isn't going to take that player option. He's going to want
zero chance. I think he takes that player option.
And I can't imagine Rudy won't. But yeah, like Julius.
I mean, again, what you can do though with that is you can do Rudy at $30 million a year extended over longer term and reduce his cap hold. And then you're at like 75, 100, you're at like 120 to 130 with Rudy, Ant, Jaden McDaniels, Donte, Conley, and Dillingham, and Terrence Shannon. I think that'd be like 130 or so.
I mean,
and that gives you like 25 million in
Sam,
space.
You're so disrespectful to your guy. You didn't even mention Leonard Miller.
Leonard's non-guaranteed though.
This is blasphemy.
Much as I love Leonard, like he's non-guaranteed.
Okay.
So the point here is that
yes,
like there's just so much flexibility. And if you want any detail on like the ownership situation, I would say I would implore people to read what Brian Windhorst wrote today. He kind of outlined, everything that's going on with Minnesota's situation and how there's still going to be a number of legal battles with the ownership group here. It feels like involving Mark Lauren, Alex Rodriguez, as well as Glenn Taylor, who is trying to not sell it. So fascinated by everything that will happen there. But they have a number of options is the point here. They have so many different ways that they can go about trying to change their roster around Ant if they find that something is working, something's not working. They want to extend the core out a little bit longer. I just think there's a lot more flexibility now than previously existed.
That's fair.
Bryce, explain to me this Detroit pick and why you think it's valuable for Minnesota fans.
I don't know that it's still. I just think it's as highest value that it's been because I think the Pistons are really motivated to not suck anymore after 4 years of being really, really bad. And the protections are starting to get low enough where those protections, they'll be good enough to not hit those protections, but still bad enough to be a lottery pick. So I just thought it was the point where it's not going to happen in 2025, but I think we said 11 and then 9. Now, the scary thing is if they stay bad, it's only a second round pick in 2027. If the protections stay in place, then Detroit sends Minnesota a second round pick and that's it. I just seem to think that there's a chance that this team, Pistons team, not this year, but by 26 or 27 is winning enough games that depending on how the lottery balls fall, that ends up being like pick number 12 in 2027 or something like that. So I never thought it had a ton of value because the protections were just so far out and this team sucked so bad, where now I'm like, okay, this may actually convey over the next few years.
Yeah, I think right now I actually would project it conveying in 2027.
Yeah.
So I'm basically seeing this as like a top 9 protected 2027 first rounder, which not a pick that has a lot of upside still, right? And teams tend to look for upside in picks that they move. I think that it will probably be more of if we want to move it in a trade, we're getting back a rotation player kind of thing, or we're just using it and getting like a cheap younger player in 2027 when Ant will be 26 years old or 27 years old, whatever he'll be, 26, I think.
Or you use it on draft night, like what the Spurs did with their number whatever pick when they traded it to Minnesota, right? Like for sure. Flexibility. There's a little more flexibility with draft capital at this point.
On top of that, I will just reiterate what the protections are. Top 13 this season, top 11 in 2026, top 9 in 2027, those NBA drafts. Okay. That I think is everything outside of the Charlotte piece of it, which I was hoping would break while we were podcasting. It has not. I'm assuming Charlotte will get just like a random couple of second round picks. Minnesota might end up sending a second round pick to Charlotte as well, just because of that. They have to touch Charlotte for it to be a 3-team deal in some way. Who knows what that whole thing will look like. Bryce, you had mini trivia.
I promise it'll be much faster tonight. Andrew, don't freak out.
Okay. Go ahead. Let's do it.
I was a little I thought we were going to talk 30 minutes of Jose Alvarado extension tonight, but maybe tomorrow.
That will be the Monday show. It's a Monday show for us this week because we'll let this breathe for a minute and then continue.
Okay, so we will go through this quickly. Mostly this is a multiple choice question. One of you gets to answer. Sometimes the other person may get a follow-up for half a point. So Andrew, starting with you, we are only talking about the 3 players involved in this trade that we for sure know of right now or talked about on this episode. Cat, Randle, Donte. Andrew, what player has started, emphasize started, the most games in their career?
Julius Randle.
Julius Randle is not correct. Julius Randle has played the most games in his career, has only started 561 of those. Cat has started every game of his 573 games.
Oh, it's close.
I don't
There's
get
a 2-game difference, is what you just said, right?
No, you can't on that one because Donte was so far off, you didn't get to give the answer. So only some of them does the other person get to try. Randle 561, Cat 573. Randle's played 641 games. This one also, Andrew, you will not get a second chance. Sam, I would like you to put in order individual seasons, their best individual seasons of 3-point makes. In order from most to least. Individual seasons of 3-point makes.
Donte, Cat, Randle.
That is incorrect. It is actually Donte, Randle, Cat. Randle made 218 the season that we referenced earlier. What year was that?
The year he shot the high volume?
Yes. 4 years ago. So that would be 2021. Right?
Was that the year you won most improved player or the high volume year where he
No. So he made 218 in 22-23.
Yeah, the year that they made
that's
him
the high volume year.
High volume.
Huh.
He took a 40% year. He was just lethal from every jump shot.
Yeah. So no, it was the high volume year where he only shot 34%, but he shot 636 threes.
Okay.
So
0-0.
It is still 0-0. Yeah, I tried to give Andrew a point that he did not earn. 3-point makes in their career. No Karl-Anthony Towns for this question. So 50-50 chance.
Julius Randle?
Julius Randle is not the correct answer. Wow, Julius Randle has made 742. Any guesses how many Donte DiVincenzo has made?
Is it over 1,000 and this wasn't close?
743.
Oh my gosh.
That's gross.
Thank you, Klay Thompson era Donte DiVincenzo.
Karl-Anthony Towns has made 975. That's why I took him out of this one. So, Sam, obviously Donte is not going to be this answer. You can still answer him if you want. Rebounds in their career. Who has the most?
Randle would be my guess.
Karl-Anthony Towns, 62-16. Randle, 6,004. We are all knotted up at 0. Okay.
Wait. Did you say 62-16?
Mm-hmm.
For Randle?
For Towns. Yeah, for Towns.
Oh, okay.
Towns is
Randle, 6,000. Okay, Sam, you will get to try for half a point on this one if Andrew gets it wrong. Okay, so stay locked in. Steals in their career. Most steals. Who has the most steals in their career?
Randle, Donte, Cat.
No. Just give me the
who has the most? I'll go Randle first.
That is not correct.
Okay.
Sam, you can steal this one for half a point.
Yeah, I was going to say Donte.
That is not correct either. It's actually Karl-Anthony Towns.
This is amazing.
So we're bad at trivia is what you're saying.
So in fairness, I think I didn't add up the number of games. Well, no, Randle has more games, but Donte just hasn't played enough games. 354. Keep that in mind. Cat 452, Randle 439, Donte 422. Okay. We're now moving to the playoffs. Okay. Andrew, you will get a chance to steal. Sam, which of these 3 players have played the most games in the playoffs? Have most playoff games?
I would guess Donte.
Yes, we get a correct answer. Sam Vecenie, Donte DiVincenzo, 39 games played, Cat 32, Julius Randle 15.
Yeah.
Okay. Andrew, who has the most 3-point made in their playoff career?
Donte DiVincenzo.
Final answer?
Yes.
Yeah, I messed up those. I did it backwards. I'm so sorry. That's all right. Keeps it tied. I should.
Okay.
I wanted to ask the 3-point mades before the games played because the game played gave it away. Would you have answered Donte?
No. I recognize. I knew how many games Randle played in the playoffs.
Okay.
So that alone, that you knew it wasn't him. Okay. And then same thing with Cat.
I also would have guessed Donte just purely based off of the Indiana series.
Yeah, I screwed that up. Okay, we have one more. Sam, you can win, but then we have a final one that may not let you in. Best in college.
Yeah.
Their best season, obviously 2 of them only had 1 season points scored. Who had the most points scored in their season?
Ooh.
So for Cat and Randle, it was their freshman season. For Donte, it was his junior. I don't think I'm giving anything away there.
I would say Julius.
Ding, ding, ding. That is correct.
Okay.
So
yeah, because Julius was amazing that Kentucky year.
Yeah.
But like seriously, the thing that almost threw me off there was Donte played so many more games, I would guess, that year. I guess it was second actual year where he played at Villanova.
Yes, correct.
Yeah,
I mean,
still Julius. Yeah.
Donte was second. So Julius had 599, Donte 537, Cat 401. Okay. For 2 points, I need a numerical answer from both of you. For 2 points, whoever's closest. And it's not whatever the game was where if you go over, you don't like whoever's closest, right? Okay. Combined freshman season 3-point makes. Combined freshman season 3-point
True.
makes.
Okay. So this is where I'm going to make you clarify. True freshman season or freshman season? Because Donte redshirted his first year.
Okay. The first year where they played games. So I would like this.
Okay.
I'm using the 15-16 season where he played games.
Yeah.
I will say 150.
Okay.
And final question here. Is this a thing where like, as long as if you go over, do you lose?
No.
Is it closest? Okay.
Just whoever's closest.
I would guess. Oh God. 14.
That's a great guess, Sam. That's an amazing guess. The correct answer is 8. So
yeah.
Cat made 2, Julius made 3, Donte made 3.
So you get this straight. If I had said 0, I would have won. Yeah.
What did Sam say?
Sam would have won. Sam would have. He had 14.
Yeah.
You would have 6 closest. So if I said 3, I would have won.
You would have won.
Yeah.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
I thought that one would have. Yeah. So Sam, you finally beat Andrew in trivia.
I beat me last week too.
I beat him
Oh,
last
did he?
week, too.
Oh, so you're
Yeah.
up 2-1.
Look,
Yeah, we tied it up.
Look,
Yeah.
nobody won here.
Well, you also asked like one of the nation's and world's foremost college experts a college question in the last 2 rounds. So it's as if you pivoted to Mets trivia at the end of this trivia. But hey, I play the rules. That's fine.
I'm not out here asking Mookie Wilson questions.
Right. Like, so Sam, how many hits did Keith Hernandez get in the 1986 World Series? Yeah.
You guys just said 2 names that I don't know.
12? I don't know.
I don't
12? Is that
Might
close,
actually
Andrew?
be big close. I know.
I don't know
He
what
had, he had 3 2-hit games. That's all I know. So it might be close.
Are we talking
to,
about
7 or
cricket?
8.
What are we talking about? I don't know what we're talking about anymore.
Oh
Well,
boy.
not a
Okay.
sport the Mets are good at the moment.
That is true. Okay, this episode went a little longer than what we expected. Bryce, tell the people where they can find your work.
Yeah, at Motor City Hoops, anything I'm putting out, podcast, writing, substacking, anything you can find on there. Appreciate it.
Andrew, tell the people where they can find Knicks Film School and where they can find you.
You can find Knicks Film School at wherever you get your podcast or YouTube channel. We did a 3-hour and 40-minute emergency live stream on Friday night. So if you want to check out that, I'm also turning it into pull clips overnight. So just go to our YouTube channel. You can see our reactions to this blockbuster trade. And of course, if you want to find the fine social work that is being done at the Game Theory podcast, you just need to go to TikTok, Twitter, or on Instagram and follow Game Theory Sam V, and you'll get all your content there.
Okay. Go to The Athletic. Keep me employed over there. Go to all of your podcast feeds. Hit the 5-star button, hit the like button. Go subscribe over on the YouTube channel as well. Game 3 Podcast with Sam Vecenie. We will be back on Monday. Bryce and I are going to go over all of the different news and notes that have occurred. We will talk about Terrence Mann's extension, Jose Alvarado's extension, Derrick Rose's retirement, maybe. We'll probably talk a little bit about Zach Lowe, being removed from ESPN for reasons beyond my comprehension. Anything that has occurred that wasn't this deal over the last week, Bryce and I are going to do. And then after that, we did the 24 and under draft with Andrew Schlecht. We will also be doing an over 32 draft,
32
which
and
is
over.
Bryce and I.
32 and over.
32 and over is the plan. So we have a fun one scheduled for Monday. We're really excited to go in and dive in and talk about all of that. I think that's all we've got. This was an hour 45. We wanted to go an hour. Shout out the New York Knicks. Shout out Karl-Anthony Towns. Until next time, we'll talk soon.